Aloha, welcome back to the Debrief. I'm your host, Emily Cristobal, and today we are joined by Harrison Rue. He is the Program Manager for the state's Transit-Oriented Development Plan, or TOD for short. Thank you so much for joining us today.
It's so great to be here. We're always glad to talk with folks who are interested in TOD.
Yes, and that brings us to our topic today, TOD. It's a term that is often tossed around by lawmakers and developers, but what does it look like and what steps does it take to make it a reality? We'll be answering those questions and more in today's episode. So, Harrison, first, I was hoping you could really just break down what TOD is and why it's so important in Hawaii's communities and infrastructure.
Sure. Transit-oriented development, or TOD for short, really came about when people looked at the neighborhoods around rail stations or bus stations and thought we want to coordinate the improvements. Somebody came up with the term transit-oriented, so neighborhoods around rail stations. Some people prefer to call it transit-oriented communities. There's a range of other terms: livable communities, smart growth, neighborhood development. But TOD in the state's perspective, as well as the cities and the neighbor islands, is really about coordinating the investments and development and improvements in areas where transit is focused. On Oahu, that's mostly along the rail line. On the neighbor islands, it's around existing village centers on the neighbor islands. And it's the same principles at different scales.
I feel like right now, one of the biggest questions is around, the rail line.
Mm-hmm.
And I was hoping you could kind of discuss a little bit of the state projects that you've been working on.
Sure. And I should caveat, I've only been with the state for about 8 months, started in January. I was leading the city's TOD program before that for years. So part of what I'm saying is stuff that I worked on for the city with the state, years ago. But, the state set up, many years ago, a long time ago, maybe around 2004, 2006, realized that they owned a lot of land, state land around the rail lines. And they, added it all up as about 2,000 acres. That's a lot of land in publicly owned land. And so the legislators several years ago set up the Transit-Oriented Development Council. It's called the Interagency Council for Transit-Oriented Development, but we just call it the TOD Council. That's all of the state agencies plus the counties to focus on statewide policies. And primary interest is the state lands, but we do a lot of coordination with private sector, with the city on Oahu, with the 3 neighbor island counties in their transit-oriented development areas. It's a way of targeting the state's investment, targeting state facilities in areas where the counties are going to be improving their transit service. It's bus-oriented TOD on the neighbor islands. It's a forum for working together.
And you mentioned working with a bunch of different agencies. Could you list some of the agencies that you work alongside with when doing this planning?
Sure. Well, in the counties, it's primarily, the mayor is the listed member of the council, but they delegate to the planning departments and the infrastructure departments, housing, usually the managing director's office. So in each of the counties, there's a range of departments we work with. In the state, there's a listed number of agencies in the TOD Council. I work in the Office of Planning and Sustainable Development. The co-chair of that council is HHFDC, Hawaii Housing Finance and Development Corporation. The other agencies that are involved in kind of housing development, Hawaii Community Development Authority, Hawaii Public Housing Authority, several other ones that are involved in development. DLNR, Department of Land and Natural Resources, they own a lot of land, particularly in East Kapolei. Department of Hawaiian Homelands, all of the University of Hawaii campuses, Health and Human Services. I'm probably leaving somebody out along here, but Department of Accounting and General Services, who are very instrumental in planning state facilities, like in the Liha Civic Center or Aloha Stadium. The Stadium Authority is a member as well. Department of Health, and many others that are involved. But the people most active are either the agencies charged with housing development or state facilities development, plus the landowning agencies that happen to own land along the rail corridor.
Yes, thank you so much for, breaking that all down. Thinking about TOD and the communities that could be created in these areas, can you kind of explain to our viewers what these communities could look like and if there's any examples of that currently right now in Hawaii or even elsewhere?
Sure, that's a great example. I don't think anybody is pretending that we're planning something entirely new. Any good community planning is built on what came before. And so, there are several places like, Waipahu, that's an old plantation town. So the plan for that area that the city developed, the state participated because we own a bunch of land around there as well, is planned on kind of growing that plantation town, character. I think one of the ways to look at what's been built out in East Kapolei is to actually look at what D.R. Horton, developers of Ho'opili, have done. It's a large private sector development. I would encourage anybody listening, if you've not ridden the rail on Oahu yet, take the kids, take the grandparents, and go out for a little bit of outing and get off the stations and explore. But you can walk around that private development and see the mix of uses, different housing types, places to gather and hang out, parks, schools are getting built, elementary schools, and look at that and see they feel like neighborhoods on other places on Oahu. You can look at some of the tower development that's getting built in Ala Moana area under the city's zoning, but there's also another state facility that was just built by Judiciary and HHFDC, Alder Street and Pi'ikoi, and that's a family affordable housing project that kind of fits into the neighborhood. Looking at places like Kaka'ako, there's been a lot of luxury development, but you're seeing much more mid-market and affordable housing being built in Kaka'ako. That's another place to look for the kind of activity and vitality and life that we'd like to see. Kamehameha Schools has done a great job developing basically a scene around the salt block. It's called salt there because it's where Hawaiians used to make salt, from the ocean, and salt was our currency back then. So it's got this economic, basis for the name as well. But that's just a cool scene, and so it's not everything's a one-size-fits all. What Kamehameha Schools did at Salt is a lot of small businesses and redeveloped existing buildings. They took an office building and turned it into housing, the 680 building. So I think the idea of, I've heard some people say the development in Iwilei area where there's a lot of state land, Kamehameha Schools and Castle and other developers. Everybody would like that to be a kind of a local version of Kaka'ako, but more family oriented, less high end, more, kind of Kaka'ako for working families. Not my term, but I kind of like it. So I think it's really key to make sure that the development fits into and improves the neighborhood. Most people want to see improvements to their neighborhood, and most people have kind of encouraged the idea or like the idea that we'll take some more density in our neighborhood as long as it improves it, provides more affordable housing, improves the streetscapes, make them safer, easier to get around, more outdoor space to gather.
And I think you mentioned something that I wanted to bring up is this idea that, sometimes the concerns of locals and people in a community is that when all this development is happening, sometimes they fear that, the characteristics, what makes the community or town in that area could be taken away when, all this development happens. What is your kind of solution of finding that balance between making communities more sustainable, but also keeping that characteristic, that charm in these areas?
Sure. I think it's really critical, number one, to ground that, working with the local governments on Oahu in the rail corridor. The city led a lot of the grassroots planning, meeting with communities. When we, as a state, work with the neighbor islands, generally the counties are in front because they're closer to the ground and know what the communities want. But whether it's the counties themselves or state efforts, some of the major state lands, those departments have done their own planning and had public workshops as well, is to take your time doing it. I think The city and the other counties are doing a really good job of having neighborhood level meetings, community workshops, or charrettes we sometimes call them, where people can mark up the maps together themselves. When you do that process, right, even if folks don't, on Oahu don't particularly, some people are strong rail proponents, some people could take it or leave it, but everybody seems to want neighborhood improvements, affordable housing, connected streetscapes. At the city, we did years worth of workshops, and those three things were kind of unanimously most important: more affordable housing, better connectivity and safer streetscapes, more gathering places for us to meet with our neighbors. And so when the plans are built on what people want, we've not had much pushback about the actual density, taller buildings, as long as they're addressing stuff on the ground that matters, connectivity and gathering spaces, and that some of that density is for affordable housing.
Yes, that's a good point. And thinking about density too, sometimes when people think density, they think of these like super towering, like 50-foot tall buildings, but I'm not too sure about specifically what the plans are. But, if we want to solve, the housing crises that is happening in Hawaii, there has to be some sort of density involved. And for those who are against, these higher buildings, what is kind of your message for them to be able to understand like the need for it?
Well, there's three or four things going on. You have to have a good process so that people do feel heard, but they also have an opportunity to hear some of the new ideas and the rationales, why, more density is proposed. Making sure that the plans themselves, whether it's, adopted county plans or whether it's plans by the individual state landowning agencies, that they take into account what's gone before, that they take into account, concerns about traffic and things like that. And, I think looking at the city's plans, they're really tailored, farther out, in Waipahu and East Kapolei, they're not as high. You get closer to town and Pearl Ridge area, they're higher, and you get closer to downtown and they're, up to the maximum height, similar to towers that you already see there. They think the same is true, but even at a much lower scale on the neighbor islands.
Yes.
I should mention, though, that in addition to county zoning, there is a state zoning called 201H. For some of your listeners, geekier planners know what that means, but it's a state code that allows developers, whether public or private, to ask for waiver of rules, including density, as long as there is a rationale for that. And, you have to have a, public hearing about it and things like that. But that will allow significantly more density than local regulations require or allow, as long as it's at least 50% affordable housing.
Yes.
Most of those projects tend to get approved because they are addressing that key need.
Yeah, I know. I think the focus that I'm hearing right now is mainly just that affordable housing, that need for that. And I've talked to some lawmakers in the past about housing in Hawaii, and what they've been kind of explaining to me is that the need for housing is kind of fallen in that workforce housing. There's housing already for like low income, but we kind of need more of that workforce for like nurses, doctors, educators, kind of in that realm. So being able to put more of these projects, and with that 201H that you mentioned, is being able to push those along.
Yeah, and I think the main thing that we've discovered, we at the city and the state before I joined, we're working for a long time on the plans and, coming up with really good plans and good images for what ought to go where, organizing it well, and then starting to define the need for infrastructure to deliver that, and sometimes realizing, well, we do have infrastructure here, but we don't have it over here. And so for the last several years, we've really been focused like a laser on coming up with the plans for, need for, and trying to figure out the funding for that infrastructure. The infrastructure unlocks the ability to deliver the affordable housing.
Yes. And you talked about funding. I think that's a question that a lot of people have. Where does the funding come from? How much do these projects cost from, start to finish? And, if it is public housing or government-led housing, how does it affect the taxpayers? I was wondering if you could provide some insight into
Well,
that?
could you ask an easy question? The quick answer is we need a lot of money. There's not enough, existing streams. But in the good news, you don't need it all at once. And so I think what we have discovered is there is a certain amount of funding for that kind of lower end to middle of affordable housing, that 30 to 60% of average area median income, to get geeky again. But there's only enough funding to build maybe a couple hundred, a little over a couple hundred units a year of that. We need a lot more. Some folks are working, like the city developed zoning, to deliver some of the affordable housing with the privately built housing, requiring that in return for the additional density. So just approving additional height and density for market rate projects can provide a little bit more affordable housing without any city or state investment except for waiving fees, right? So that's another small piece. There's a lot of smaller pieces of this that will add up to addressing the need. The fact that we, the state, own a lot of land, that, if you're contributing the land free to the deal for some development, can make the affordable housing easier to develop because they're not having to pay for land. So that's a small piece of the puzzle. Investing in the infrastructure for that land that we own can be another piece of the puzzle, and that's where we're kind of starting to define the needs. It's not cheap. I'll give you some numbers in a minute, but when we know what that infrastructure need is in specific areas where we, the state, or the counties control the land, we can plan ahead and start to budget, a few years ahead for that, try and deliver the infrastructure. It turns out when you go after the affordable housing funds, if you already have the land and the infrastructure, you're more likely to qualify for some of that funding. You can also qualify for federal grants better as well. So kind of laying out that strategy. So to pick a need, HHFDC, the finance agency, just did a infrastructure needs assessment and master plan for the Evilay area, Evilay, along with the city and all the other state departments, and came up with a range of over $700 million needed for the infrastructure in that area over 30 years. So if you start dividing 700 by 30, it's actually a manageable number every year. But you need to know you might need to front load some of that. And I should, thank the legislature and the governor for supplying. The state agencies applied for some money and got some funding for the initial infrastructure in that area just last year. So when you have a kind of a plan to say this is what we need, and we need to start planning on it and start the design of the infrastructure and then add a little bit more of a year, that's one of the ways you do it. There's still not, and I think in East Kapolei, it's a similar large number. We did get the funding to do an infrastructure master plan last year. It's actually out for RFP for consultants right now to come up with the more accurate numbers for the infrastructure and a list of priority projects that we can start going after the funding for. But that's still not enough. So we've, for the last couple of years, we've been doing infrastructure, TOD infrastructure finance strategy, and that will include a range of other tools, district finance, some tweaks to the tax code, and a range of other tools to come up with, not all the money, but another piece of it that we don't currently have.
Yes, and when you talk about infrastructure, do you mean like roads, like sewer capacity?
Yeah.
What do you mean specifically?
Yeah. So roads, water, sewer, could be bus stops on the roads, just better crossings on existing roads. Typically includes storm drainage. Now in some of the areas, some climate adaptation. It can include absolutely includes the electric, and then the private. You have to plan for the private things like telecom and cable and things like that. When you do a greenfield development for, like the Ho'opili out in East Kapolei, the developer plans all that, does all the phasing, funds most of it, builds it, and then even has HECO come in and run the wires, but they put in the conduit and the pads for HECO's equipment. In a place like Evilay, we kind of realized, there's no master private developer that's going to do that, which is why the state and the city are kind of taking the lead of saying, we're going to plan for it. We're going to figure out how to fund it with the private developers that it's serving, as well as the state agencies that it's serving.
Thinking about it too, when you talk about these communities, an idea that kind of comes to mind is, making it more livable, walkable, and maybe in some instances not need to, use your personal car to get everywhere. Can you kind of speak onto how this planning process goes from to be able to create these more livable, walkable communities?
Sure. Well, in the good news, we already have. We don't need to make this stuff up. We already got a lot of very walkable, livable communities on Oahu. And even our suburban development is generally more compact here than it is on the mainland because we have less land. So, and there's usually pretty good kind of walkability to the elementary schools are usually in the middle of neighborhoods with the park. Whoever thought of that, it's kind of brilliant. And, the bus route goes in and you can take it to the school. The high schools generally tend to be along the main road, so high school students can take the bus back and forth on their own because there's good bus service along the main roads. So that idea of we don't need to bring that idea from the mainland or from Asia. We kind of know how to do it here, but we need to do more of it and better. That kind of connected grid of walkable streets. You look at an example one of the early TODs is, top of the hill in Kaimukea. That was a trolley car suburb. Trolley car used to go out from downtown to Wailea Avenue, and so all that main street there was originally TOD, way back in the day. Trolley went away, but there's still good bus service to there. But you look at the grid of streets in Kaimukea they were oriented towards that trolley car line, and so we kind of know how to do that already. You'll see those kind of plans are very similar to what went out in Ho'opili or what you're going to see on some of the other state lands as well. Connectivity, there's not enough retail to have that in the ground floor of every new residential building, but active uses or, housing with front doors and things like that, making sure there's a park that's walkable from everywhere, and making sure that you plan it around the bus lines and have good connectivity for that. That's all kind of baked into pretty much all of the plans.
Yes, and the reason why I wanted to bring up TOD too is because it's a term that's been going on for years. Like I've seen it around, and thinking about planning, how long does the planning process take, and how often are you guys revising it?
That's a really good plan. Well, in the good news, you don't have to wait for a plan to be done to be actually doing projects that you don't have to wait for a plan to get adopted. The typical, when the city was doing a typical neighborhood TOD plan, it's like a 3-year process with all the different workshops. Some state agencies have been, working 2 or 3 years on their plans. Some plans can often take 10 years to do. I mentioned, Ho'opili, they were planning for a decade or two before they broke ground in the private sector. But the good news is you shouldn't have to wait to act until you have a plan. We have a great housing need. That 201H zoning I mentioned, you can apply for that even if the local zoning doesn't allow it. The city many years ago adopted an interim TOD ordinance before the plans were all done, before the zoning was all done, that allowed developers to apply for that. And you see several of the new towers along Ala Moana and in that area have been built using that interim zoning because the zoning is not yet adopted. So it always takes too long, but if you have a good idea and good proposal and community support, and the same is true, you can act on some of the improvements, bus improvements or better street crossings or things like that. You don't have to have the plan completed before you decide to act.
Finally, talking a little bit more about, outer island, neighbor island projects. Could you talk a little bit more about what TOD looks like there?
It looks like it fits on each of the islands. There's some things that are similar, in Kauai and Maui and Big Island. There's some things that are different, and we at the state are kind of in support of those. But I think the things that are in common is, much less density than you see on Oahu. In each of their cases, they each picked 3 or 4 kind of priority areas to focus on, and we at the state legislature gave us some money at OPSD to support planning grants. So we've given out planning grants to the counties and to state agencies who are planning facilities there. So, like in Lihue, good example. They've been doing on Kauai. They've been doing some great planning, and they got some federal dollars to implement street improvements and things like that. They're planning around their civic center. DAG's, Department of Accounting and General Services, is working on planning a state, office building in their state civic center. They're, made transit center improvements, working on a mobility plan, feasibility for affordable housing development, infill on some of the parking lots. So, in general, in that case, it's really about making improvements, a little bit of infill, a little more housing, better transit, co-locating state and county offices together so they're easier for customers to do business at different offices, and better for the employees. They can share parking, and they're all near the growing bus service, right? That common theme is similar on Maui. Across from the big mall there's a large block across from a state library, and right next to the big mall, and close to the bus, the bus service. And their county's building a new transit center for that area next to where DAGS is planning a multi-story, could be 5 or 6 story office building for state offices. May or may not include a new library. That's all being discussed in the planning. And then HHFDC, the Housing Finance Agency, just put out and awarded plans for several hundred units of affordable housing. This is all in one block, all a coordinated plan. We at OPSD just kind of make sure that everybody's talking to each other and sit in on the designs to make sure it's all connected. And so very similar on Big Island, transit center, potential office building, potential library, potential affordable housing, all being planned together in 2 or 3 different locations.
Yes, absolutely. And my final question for you is, what are your goals, moving forward and, continuing this planning and your vision for Hawaii?
I don't think my vision matters much. I've been working at this a long time, and I think what matters is what's the collective vision, the mayor, county mayors, governor, legislators, the private developers. As long as they are all based on what the community wants to see and they're working together. My personal vision is everybody keeps working together and keeps delivering stuff for the people.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Harrison. I definitely learned a lot, and I hope you guys all did too. You can watch and listen to more of the Debrief at hawaiinewsnow.com or wherever you get your podcasts. This is your host, Emily Cristobal, and mahalo for listening.